Joining me now is Liberal Senator Alex Antic. Alex, great to see you as always. Now, the Albanese government has come under fire for funding that they provided to mosques, some of which mourned the death of Iran's vile Ali Khamenei. Now, you were in the Senate this week. Amazing job you did highlighting all the absurd and ridiculous things. I mean, the $670,000 to a mosque, which fortunately has been cancelled, but there are so many other examples, Alex.
Yeah, Rowan, look, there are. I mean, it was, an interesting week in the Senate in the sense that we didn't really achieve anything at all for a long period of time. On the first day, in fact, 4:30, we hadn't done anything except censure Pauline Hanson. I didn't, but others did, and so on and so forth. So I thought, look, we are seeing waste everywhere in this with this government. I mean, you've got the extraordinary waste on the climate alarmism, the kind of the transmission lines, the trillions of dollars towards net zero, and all this sort of stuff. But when you actually drill into it, the devil's in the detail with some of this stuff. Some of the grant funding that's given out to all and sundry in Australia is quite extraordinary. Funding things from climate initiatives, Indigenous climate initiatives to, all sorts of esoteric spending. Some of them, $1.5 million a pop. And it struck me that we're now told 1 in 3 Australians have suffered some sort of food insecurity in their families, unable to eat. 1 in 6 apparently Australians now are down to 1 meal a day. And this government is spending our money like it's going out of fashion, like a drunken sailor, as they say, spending it overseas, spending it on their vanity projects to, sort of appeal to the climate crowd. And real Aussies are doing it tough. And it is actually appalling, I have to say. I mean, it's hard not to see some of those grants as being in jest. But, I mean, really, the reality here is this government is not doing everything, as the Prime Minister says it could, to help the cost of living crisis. There is so much more that could be done if the government was willing to tighten its belt, which it is not.
Exactly, and particularly all those ridiculous projects. There are certain Indigenous spending is required, but there's lots of projects which you just wonder where the millions are going, and certainly the climate stuff. Now, speaking of climate stuff, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, whose entire career was built on climate change. He was for weird reasons we won't go into, he was the head of the Bank of England for a while, telling the whole world that the climate change, we were all going to be doomed. It was all death and destruction, and the world had to change its economy and all this stuff. He's also a big favourite of Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum. Same thing, climate, for years on end. He's now Canadian Prime Minister. He's made a speech yesterday. I won't bother playing it to you because it was so dull and boring and full of waffle. But what I did notice, he did not mention climate change, not even once. Has the tide turned? Are we over climate? Is this it, finally? People realising it's not the great doomsday call it used to be?
To coin a phrase, the tide has turned. Yes, you're quite right, Rowan. Look, I was thinking about this the other day. I really do feel like it is. It wasn't that long ago inside that building in Canberra that you would walk in and that's all you'd hear about, from the most entry-level first-term MP all the way through to the Prime Minister. And I got to say, my side of politics as well, kind of, pandering to that notion for a long period of time as well. Now, it just does appear that the switch has been switched off. And I think they have run their race because the numbers just don't stack up. All of the things that we were told were going to happen don't happen. My former colleague, great man, former Senator Eric Abetz used to have a spot down in Salamanca where he would go routinely and take a photo because it was meant to be underwater apparently for a long period of time, never was. And so people have woken up, I think. And of course, the other thing about this is now the global elites now realise that we're going to have to find some way of generating enough energy for the AI boom. And all of a sudden, we're less worried about coastal properties going underwater and more about this sort of impending AI dystopian future that we're building in front of us and don't seem to be pushing back on, of course. But the good news is that the climate change nonsense is drifting off. The bad news is that, as Margaret Thatcher said, this style of socialism, which is what the climate agenda ultimately was, just a rebadged form of socialism, will burrow its way to the top just like it always does. Margaret Thatcher said it, never changes, it just changes its clothes, communism. And they'll say that's outrageous and it does, you hate the planet and all that sort of nonsense. But that's the truth. This brand of socialism will find its way to the top of the tree again.
Well, Mark Carney was busy trying to create some, without saying the word. He also never mentioned Donald Trump in his entire speech. And I think he's feeling a bit sore. It's the kind of, the club of people Donald Trump has trashed. I think Carney's trying to form a little club of what he calls middle powers. Albo got on quite well with Trump, so I'm not sure Albo was entirely keen on being lumped in the anti-Trump crowd. But anyway, what was noticeable as well, as you just mentioned, a lot of talk about AI. But of course, AI requires vast amounts of energy that renewables can never, ever provide. Now, I want to just ask you finally about the Farah by-election. This is the one that Susan Lees spat the dummy and headed off. That's OK. That's up to her. May 9th. What do you think is going to happen? Can One Nation actually deliver on this recent massive surge in the polls?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it has been a massive surge, and there's no denying that. And, people like me and people like you, Rowan, have been saying for a long period of time that One Nation are, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are showing the blueprint for where the Liberal Party should be going.
Absolutely.
And this is the test. This is the test. I mean, this is going to be the one which shows us where that's up to, and a test for One Nation as well, a test for the Liberal Party. It's a seat we have to win. It's as simple as that. And, I think we are now heading in the right direction with Angus, but it is going to be a difficult race. And the other thing that's interesting about Farah is the number of candidates that we're going to see. So it is going to be a completely different by-election on May 9 than we saw at the general election a year ago. And a massive test. And, we have our own test here in South Australia. The 21st of March is the state election here. So these are the markers for where the party is up to in terms of its remediation. Look, the only way here is drifting back to common sense, speaking for Middle Australia, talking about the forgotten people, addressing some of these nonsensical things like climate change, like adults, and not pandering to this nonsense anymore. And I think the votes will return, but that's the challenge ahead.
Alex Antic, thanks for joining me.